Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast. Real answers to real problems. With your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vision API, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Full of Ship. I'm your host, Kyle Henderson, and today we have as our special guest, Eric Rempel of Redwood Logistics, Chief Innovation Officer. Welcome, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Good morning or good afternoon, actually, in Vietnam.
Yeah, in the supply chain logistics industry, the people you work with, the people you speak to are pretty much scattered all over the place. So you're calling in from Chicago today, right?
Yeah, correct.
Wonderful. Well, to get started, I think the listeners would be interested in hearing a bit about your background, yourself, of course, your career in logistics, and your story at Redwood.
Yeah, it's kind of I think everyone has an typical story about how they got into logistics, right? Their personal story is different, but a lot of folks, kind of fell into it, and I'm no exception. My background is in computer engineering and math. I used to do chip design in college, and thought that that's where I was going to head. I always had a penchant towards business and entrepreneurship, but trying to figure out what I was going to do was tough. As I was navigating the workspace and I was thinking I was going to get my MBA, I stumbled across Redwood, and I walked into this office that just had this absurdly positive energy of a bunch of freight brokers in Chicago, really just hustling and buying and selling transportation. And I was just floored to the energy, and that this is what a work environment could be like. And so at first I thought I was going to sign up to do a little bit of technology work for them for a few weeks. And that was 18 years ago. I have been there for 18 years, started by building out the brokerage platform, the TMS, on that side of the fence. We started a managed transportation division, which led into consulting and integration and supply chain optimization. And then as that grew, that really led us to the development of one of our flagship platforms, Redwood Connect, which integrates our customers' enterprise systems with everything in the cloud for supply chain, and we make the systems they have and the systems they want to purchase that much more valuable, and make them all talk in real time. So as far as Redwood goes, we're full service 3PL with services mostly across North America, but with customers that span the globe. Our model, our operating model, is what we call LPaaS, or Logistics Platform as a Service, which is almost like this a la carte menu style of wherever you want to start within the organization, whether it's traditional individual loads being booked through a brokerage, or managed transportation, or starting with a digital supply chain transformation, and then go from there as you pick off that low hanging fruit. So we really look to use the power of people. We've got almost 1,000 employees now, and growing, and we love creating awesome solutions for our customers.
And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your customers. Who do you serve? How do you help?
Yeah, so our customers really span across every vertical. For us, it doesn't matter. We like to say that every organization is unique, right? So every shipper, every partner of ours that we've ever walked into, they've said, I'm unique, and I have different needs, and I have different types of freight, and I have different types of modes, and I have different ways in which that I have to distribute my network. But the patterns that we've found to optimize those are often the same, which is to create those integration points between the transportation management life cycle, from planning and procurement all the way through to settlement and payment and everything in between. And when we can find ways to automate that, whether on behalf of them or directly for our customers, pretty unique things happen, and we put them at that intersection of logistics and tech, and help them. We help them innovate quickly, right, and to deal with the changing market and what we're all seeing out there.
Understood. And speaking of the changing market, so you've been in the space for a fair amount of time, and you've seen kind of a different adoption patterns of new solutions, new technologies. What's kind of popped up in the last few years that you weren't seeing in the space maybe when you started your career?
Yeah, I think There's always the conversation that I think we can have about the overused terms of machine learning and AI and the difference between, and what's the difference between an algorithm and a neural net, and we can go super deep if we want to. But I think a lot of stuff that we knew was coming, if you look at that Gartner hype cycle, right, things are starting to come out of that trough of disillusionment. And I think a lot of the simplest answer I can give is a lot of the stuff that was, hey, what's your data strategy? How are you going to use it? And how are you going to move away from Hippo, right, which is the highest paid person in the organization, is making the decision to being a data driven organization. And if you think about the past 5 years, I think a lot of folks were exporting data to Excel, and they would have a spreadsheet that they'd work on for 3 weeks, present it, everyone would say, aha, but the market already flipped. I think today, or, I know today, because we're implementing it and have implemented it for many customers as well as ourselves, you have live data streams coming from all of your systems going to, a cloud data warehouse like Snowflake, and, visualized on something like Tableau or Looker, or, pick your poison of how you want that visualized. And you're bringing consumable, digestible decision-making information to the reps. And then I think there's a fair amount of organizations that are taking that data and are creating feedback loops and, leveraging machine learning to, find, patterns between what they think is going to happen and what actually happens. And when those correlations stack up with each other, they're making live actionable decisions. But what I think is really neat about it is many companies have realized that, the T1000s from Terminator aren't here yet to run logistics. We're presenting a lot of this data to reps who understand the industry, understand the market, can use that data to make faster, better decisions. But the full automation with such a fragmented market with so many steps involved, there's still a lot of really smart, really important people involved. And I think finding that balance in between is still important today, no matter how much tech we throw at it.
And curious, when you say how much tech we throw at it, and you mentioned a bit about live streams of different data being visualized, essentially having more resources that are live available at the fingertips of decision makers. What are you kind of seeing in the space? What's been like the biggest bang for your customers' buck in terms of activating live streams of what kind of data? How are
Yeah.
they making decisions better in? And then I got a follow-up question about what's been their pattern of adoption as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll look at it from two angles, right? I'll look at it from a customer that simply wants to embed technology into an existing solution. So an example of that would be a shipper that already has an API, and they just want more rates and optionality in their routing guide when they quote a door-to-door, shipment. And so, whether that's, an organization like Freightos that offers international door-to-door, or what we're doing at Redwood across North America, we have any point to any point real-time rates with 100% tender acceptance, where you can get that rate and you can know with certainty that it's going to be moved. That's a game changer, right? Especially in this volatile market, where finding capacity is tough. Although the market is starting to flip a little bit, but we've seen these cycles now over the last 3 years, where whether it's the stimulus checks, or it's the latest conflict in Ukraine, right? There's challenges that flip things quickly. So I think being able to have a partner where you can get real time rates that you can rely on and actually book, while, to be fair, you have to look at the rest of the market and look at data. The other half of that, and another way to look at it, is what information and data can I consume myself as a shipper or a 3PL or a service provider of any sort, and bring that into my decision making process, and how do I grab that data and find meaning out of it, right? Because once you have more data, you're generally looking for more data to correlate it, right, and to make sure that you're not crazy. So I think that that's the second part of your first question, which is you can weave in data, right, and find patterns on your own, or you can leverage organizations that are giving you the logistics value prop, which is here's a door-to-door rate, regardless of mode of transportation, and you can execute on it. In terms of adoption, the second part of your question, we're seeing a lot of adoption on, for example, our rating API, right, where customers say they have no obligation to book or not to book. So we're embedding it right into their TMS, whether it's, Blue Yonder, Oracle, MercuryGate, what have you. And Redwood just becomes a real-time rate in the marketplace. And on the other side of the fence for our organizations that are leveraging Redwood Connect to integrate their supply chain, they're just getting rid of all the manual work, right? What if you didn't need to deal with PODs and BOLs and they just showed up and workflow continued, and your order management system and your purchase orders automatically pick the right carrier, and you just had to deal with exceptions. So it really depends on what customers are looking for, but the adoption is really picking up because the cost of entry and the complexity of getting there is falling precipitously. And if you think about, the three things that stop anything from happening tech wise, right? Uniformity, adoption, and scale. Uniformity is not there yet, but adoption is picking up because the scale is there and thus the cost is going down. So we're pretty excited, and we think that we're just at the beginning of the digital transformation of supply chain.
Yeah, I'm curious because much of what you were saying that you guys are delivering today, has been something envisioned in the industry for a long time. Like book your freight online, have it managed like your airline tickets that you got for your summer holiday, and have all your itinerary and all your details kind of loaded up into space. That's easy to access. All your bill of lading information, customs information, etc.
Right.
Just
Right.
curious. I built a number of technology platforms in other industries before I came to this space, but you've been in this space longer. How much trouble was it to actually make that a reality in some sense? Like, how long did it really take you guys to move the needle and be able to fully automate and deliver on that promise?
It took a long time, and building the tech was, um, I'd say only half the battle, or even less than half. Um, I'm super proud of our technology. I think it's incredible, and ease of use and scale and speed and all of those great things. But you have an evangelism problem. You have a change management problem. You have a hyper fragmented marketplace where your tech could be incredible, but if it's not adopted by the outside world, who cares? It's just going to sit on a shelf. So education, evangelism, training, support, all on top of a product that has to be amazing. But then when you think of it on top of it, logistics is hyper complicated. And I'm not just talking about the fragmentation and finding the right loads. I'm talking about, the business objects, what's inside of a tender, what happens when there's different rule sets, when company A is different than company B, and managing all of those exceptions. Those rules are often tribal knowledge. And you have to work almost as a consultant, dare I say, therapist, to extract data from your customers so that you can understand what's meaningful to them, because there's a reason that these companies have some archaic processes or some things that seem backwards, but they provide massive value to these businesses. And so your solution, as whiz bang awesome as it is, needs to be something that is without a shadow of a doubt important to the CIO and CFO, but also to the logistics planner, right? That's running the day to day. So I think that reminding ourselves that, the disruption that's trying to come into supply chain, while a lot of the technology is incredible, is only going to be successful when it's looked at as a human problem, and not just a neat tech problem.
And what were some of like the breakthrough moments in being able to do that? Was it something changed in the marketplace? Was it something changed in kind of very sizable relationships that it allowed you to actually
Yeah.
deliver on the technical promise type of thing?
So it was, right. I mean, listen, Moore's law and compute power doubling every 18 months, right? That always helps, right? If you just sit around, right, your algorithm's going to perform, twice as good in 18 months. But if you really think about what it means, it's, can you have a fluid experience, right? You think about users' attention spans when they go to a website, right? It's very similar for someone in logistics. They have so many pieces of information flying at them. The real question is, with a high degree of certainty, can you present information to someone that they trust and they believe and they'll act on it? So, from a brokerage point of view and from a buying and selling transportation and having a rate that you can believe in instantly, right? You have to earn that trust, and that takes time, both internally, right, with carrier reps, but both externally with customers who have to buy it and understand that they're paying for a level of service that's a guarantee. um, you know, on the other side of our business, where we're interweaving and creating, connections between our customer systems and building out digital supply chains where, we're automating all of their systems and connecting all of their trading partners. That's a place where the customer has to have the vision that there's a better way, right? What if I wasn't spending all of my time dealing with exceptions or paperwork or, figuring out the right routes, or, I could, consolidate LTL or zone skip parcel or do any of these things that before were nearly impossible because I didn't have the compute power or the application or the skills or the data feed in real time to know which orders were available on my warehouse floor. So that change requires not just people willing to change, but really a coach on the customer side that says we are moving towards a automated world, and this is how we plan on doing it. But the reality is, like any consulting project, right? It requires a good plan with great communication and folks who understand logistics and technology. It's again just such a fragmented market in every way, and I'm not just talking about carriers. And you have to appreciate that every business is different and try and find that 80/20 that lives within every organization.
And there's been a host of different, say, solutions or kind of technical answers to challenging problems or very manual efforts in the logistics space, as you've described. And I'm kind of curious, uh, of the different kind of capabilities you've mentioned in that classic adoption curve, like the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the later majority.
Yeah.
Where do you think, what technical solutions in the supply chain space, or what digitized solutions, which is farthest along in the curve, which is just beginning in the curve right now?
Yeah, I always find it fascinating to know how many organizations grew and don't have a digital strategy for how they move their freight. So an organization starts up and they'll grow, and they'll have a bunch of parcel and eventually some LTL, and they'll have contracts with UPS and FedEx. Maybe they'll get some regional carriers for LTL. Eventually, it's truckload, and they work with a few brokers. And then as the business grows and grows and grows and things look good, they're just throwing freight on the truck that's there at that time of day, printing a bill of lading from the warehouse management system with a pick ticket, and off it goes. And then by the time they get the invoice, they have visibility to what they're paying, plus anything running outside of their network where it's prepaid and coming inbound. That's nuts, right? I mean, like you have all of your orders, you know what you're buying, you know what you're selling, and if you just streamed that data to any transportation management system, used a routing guide, automatically selected the least cost carrier, you could save 10% in this market, right? Just by selecting the right carrier. And so, like, that to us is the lowest hanging fruit, which is you set up a purchase order and sales order feed to any TMS, and you have a game changer on your hands. And it's just about the speed of which your orders are able to get to a system that can select the right carrier to not slow down your warehouse operations. And, all of a sudden you have a scat code pre-printed on a warehouse label, and your forklift operators know where to put it, and you put it in the right staging area, and you got 10% on what is potentially a multi-million-dollar logistics spend. And so you think of that in terms of low-hanging fruit. Like it's a why not.
So you're saying that the opportunities right now are in digitizing the fundamentals, not AI, ML, predictive, things
So
that feel very futuristic.
what good is it to find correlations in data when the data doesn't represent what actually happened?
Right.
you know in that ranges from late data to not the right carrier to my SKUs are off, my dimensions are off, my all of these things are off, right? Versus finding a way to clean the data, right? So when you mention AI, right, like Redwood Connect essentially is a data pipeline as a service, right? And whether it's being used for machine learning and running machine learning models, or just to move and translate data between, an order management system and a TMS, it's the same data pipelines, right? They just spin up as customers need them and move data at high speeds. But you have to start with the fundamentals, right? To your point, which is, am I executing it through there? And then when I have a decision, do I then have that feedback of this is how I execute it, because the invoices are coming in and now I have actuals against my accruals. So I can know that, hey, I printed this to go on Kyle's Express, but it actually went on, Eric's transport, and it cost me twice as much once I get that invoice, right? And then you can run, really simple overspend reports, and you can see where you're missing out. And then at that point, right, if you think about it like a maturity curve, right, phase two is, okay, how do I go from descriptive analytics, right, to predictive, and and further down the road, and trying to make things happen by encouraging behavior. But that's a bit further, right? Like there's so much low hanging fruit right now in just automating the doing of things the right way. I think that's a very poor run-on sentence I just said, but doing the stuff in the goodest of ways. Yeah. So like there's immense value there that's being missed. But then once you have that, and you have a pipeline, and you have the ability to drag and drop and move data from one of those pipelines without interrupting to another process, like improve doc scheduling to reduce detention, or prepare for an inbound container that you're going to try and really expedite by having the paperwork complete ahead of time to facilitate the human process involved. Those types of things stack value, but you got to start with the basics.
Curious, what's the profile of company that doesn't have a TMS right now, but should buy a TMS right now?
Honestly, if you've got, so there's a difference between buy and partner. I think if you have up to a $5 million spend in logistics, I would recommend partnering. Right, look at a managed services provider. Shameless plug. Redwood does this. But that's where the cost of the technology is offset by the savings in transportation, right? So we'll save you $5 and we'll charge you $1 for the tech, right? Because we give our customers, whether it's MercuryGate or Oracle, right, we give them a Gartner recognized TMS based on their needs. We're not pitching any of our own technology. We just want to connect it to their supply chain. Once you're over $5 million, right, the ROI is usually less than a year, and you've got your own, right there. The cost of these is approaching commoditization, where it just makes sense to have it. You pick the one that works best for you, and then you have to think about, right, am I a global shipper? Which TMS is best for that, right? Do I need air and ocean way more than I need domestic parcel in the United States, right? There's choices to be made there. But overall, if you're over $5 million in annual freight spend, a TMS pays for itself instantly. And you'd be surprised how many large organizations run on spreadsheets, because they have basic shipping capabilities in an order management system. And then they manage it in a spreadsheet, and they grow. And these businesses get really, really big, and they just don't have that capability.
So earlier in the conversation, you mentioned Redwood Connect, and you gave a bit of a description about it. I'm curious, you know, what makes Connect different than other connector or middleware platforms in this space? And when you were designing this, what were the major considerations you took into account before you put it in front of the first customer?
So I'll start a little bit techie, and then I'll move away from it quickly, because that's generally when I lose people. But the biggest foundational change that I needed was, I needed integrations to move away from developers and towards logistics people. And I needed to figure out a way to do that. So my team and I really, over the years, right, we were looking at various tools where, we could drag and drop and, do data transformations and try to run them. But everything we ran into was failing us, whether it was, Microsoft BizTalk or, orchestration tools, or, we even leveraged MuleSoft for a while. And while they're great tools and they have their purpose, for us, the paradigm shift needed to be away from being developer centric and towards being logistics user centric. So our goal was really to democratize, integrations, but our audience was folks who understand logistics. And what I mean by that is we've got about 100 professional services folks who don't know how to code, right? They know what an Excel, what an order looks like, whether it's an Excel or XML or JSON, we know EDI, right? But there's no code required. And what we wanted to do is to support, back to what I was saying earlier, when every shipper is different. Well, if every shipper is different, every shipper's data is dramatically different. Even if they use the same systems, they store stuff in different fields. It means different things. Plus the tribal knowledge of, if this field is empty and that field is empty, that means it's an injection load. So we need a trailer interchange to happen at this specific location, and that's just what it means. And so you think about all of those rules, and what we said, is there a way to, like almost you're in Visio or Lucid Chart, to go from step to step to step, where before that they said, hey, when it comes from the order system into the TMS, here's what needs to happen. But here's all the use cases in between and what has to happen to the data to get there. And when that went to IT, it became a black hole of, they tried, it wasn't right. They tried, it wasn't right. And then 6 months later, when we wanted to edit it, they don't even remember what they worked on, or that person doesn't work in the organization anymore. So our whole thing was, how do we create an anything to anything machine to deal with connecting systems, connecting trading partners, EDI, API, every file format, even streaming data to, cloud data warehouses, and put it in one package that requires zero IT to do it. And we did that because we wanted to deliver on that logistics value, which is, imagine if my orders were there and I could optimize in real time. Imagine if I could get the value out of my TMS purchase rather than, batch data once a day where files are missing. Imagine if I could, orchestrate workflow from one system to another. And so the genesis of it really was enabling and empowering logistics people to build high-speed data pipelines where they don't even know what it is, but they can't screw it up. Where things like security and encryption and scale and all of the ilities that you need in an application are there, but it just feels like you're, connecting dots and it just works. And so that's been a labor of love for the last, what year is it? 8 years now. And over the last 3 years, we've been running on the latest version of our platform and just absolutely loving it and getting amazing results out of it.
Forgive me for oversimplifying, but it seems like much of what you're saying is about, creating visibility of the items and the actions that happen throughout your end-to-end supply chain, and making that, say, available and actionable to the non-technical person.
Yep.
What do you think needs to change in the industry to help facilitate that type of solution set to the entire industry, and what will be the reliability challenges in doing that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. To now reframe your simpler explanation, because you're spot on. We have an event-driven system. When there's an event in one of your systems, what do you want to happen across all your other systems and any of your partners in real time? That's what it does. And to your point, what needs to change? Well, in every single one of our data pipelines that comes out, what do we have to do? We have to take a square peg and we have to send it to a round hole. And that means data translation, enrichment, transformations, rules lookups, scrubbing, cleansing, all of the things that, data scientists, need to do. And so this becomes like a topic that people are like, and so if you think about it, what could help make this a lot easier, and I'll preface it by saying good luck, is a uniform data model that works for every business for all of the nouns and verbs in the logistics industry. Tender shipment, right? Sounds easy, but which fields? Is it item level? Is it too big? How does it grow, right? Like, are you using a graph API? Are you using a traditional object model? Like all of these things, almost need an IEEE standards. And, lots of folks have gotten together and created consortiums and tried to create standards that anyone can connect to. And they fall apart because they can't agree on it and they have to get back to their day job. So it's a tough one out there. But our hope is that we make data translation and transformation so easy that the 80/20 rule makes it much easier to connect systems, because an SAP for HANA order, right, is, relatively similar to, an order that comes out of, I'm just going to pick on Salesforce, right? If someone's using that for an order management system. And so if you think about it, and that, they have origin, destination, weight, density, dimensions, right? And then you get to the items and it starts getting complex, and then the rules start kicking in. That's where it gets a little wonky. But if you can make dealing with that on a case-by-case basis really simple without code, which is what we're doing, then you don't care that there isn't a standard. We deal with what our customers give us, no matter how ugly it is. In fact, they're working with us because it's ugly, right? And it's a hard problem in the first place. So, the holy grail is that we're all uniform, and you pick up the telephone, you dial, the right digits, and it goes to any phone in the world. Well, with logistics data, it's just we're a bit away from that.
Would it be fair to say that Redwood Connect is a no-code, low-code solution for supply chain orchestration?
100%.
How do you get C-levels to understand what that is?
So it depends. If a C-level is aware that they have a supply chain integration problem on their hands, and they've been trying to connect their enterprise systems, legacy or cloud, with new SaaS-based technology and all their partners, and they're on a 3-year endeavor of trying to connect these things, and it's still not going well, that's when we politely raise our hand and say, this is what we can do, and we can leapfrog you there very quickly. If you're talking to someone who is starting as a different persona, perhaps a VP of supply chain, that says, I need a TMS, and I just assume connectivity is built in because I didn't even think about that part, but I know what I want the TMS to do. We can help get them the right technology they want, and then we connect it with the platform without really asking questions. And then there's folks who haven't had the problem yet, right? So that's the toughest one, which is, for them, we've solved a problem that they don't know that they have yet, which is, as they grow, they don't know the importance of orchestration across their supply chain and what that could really do for them, from demand planning all the way down to returns. And if it just takes some folks some time to feel the pain, that's okay. And some have the foresight to see ahead of time that will be the pain. But we have to deal with all those personas and really just continue to educate, talk to folks like yourselves and get the message out there, which is, there's a better way to do this that doesn't break the bank, that makes it easy for you to build and manage and monitor your own connections and see everything, flawlessly with a single pane of glass, and do it without code, right? That is where we believe that any persona will understand that a supply chain needs harmonization and event-driven orchestration to really hum, and we're on a mission to teach that.
It seems safe to assume that it's easy to tell the story at the C-level of this wave of digitization will absolutely have a positive effect on the bottom line. What's the stories around how it's going to have a positive effect on the top line?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So, we look at our key value drivers of optionality, right? Because we don't like being a walled garden. We like to let our customers in, and if they want to give a majority of their business to our competitors once they're on our platform, that's cool, right? And they get to pick any tech. Control is an obvious one because, once you're orchestrated, you can work it like a marionette puppet and do whatever you want to your supply chain. But profitability, right? We started by saying savings, but for a top line, right? Like a lot of organizations turn their ability to move freight into a profit center, right? So you can turn your inbound, you can look, when you have that data, you can make your partners better and you can turn that into a way to make money as well. And that's just speaking on freight. And then when it comes to the product itself, right, and you're able to control your supply chain and get things there through the right partners, right, that increases top line just because you're the reliable company that can actually get me my stuff, especially in a day like today. So, there's a whole number of ways that, I think Apple was the one that coined the term, right? We're a supply chain first organization. And when you look at it that way and you say, if I can control where all of my parts are that make my products, I can have the best user experience. And, that's, to your point, what we're helping companies do to control the top line, not just save on the bottom.
Curious, what are other companies that are example of supply chain first companies?
That's a good question.
Maybe
I think,
Wayfair, like maybe Wayfair is a good example of that.
yeah, I think so. I think they can try and control end to end. I'll have to think about that one and
Amazon
shoot.
to a certain extent. It's a,
Well,
yeah.
certainly. I think the viewers are going to start putting angry comments in the notes here now that I didn't know that. Certainly Amazon, right? That's a whole nother model of control. But when we work with our customers and we see the ones that have plant shutdowns because they can't get product in, and I'm not even talking about from an international perspective or containers stuck at sea. I mean that they booked a carrier and the carrier didn't show up and they didn't know about it until that day, right? That could be prevented, right? And a shutdown might cost 50 grand an hour, or who knows, right? So it doesn't have to be something spectacular that makes the news, right? It can be something that if I just had better visibility to my inbound trucks on a domestic move, who knew?
I'm sure there's some research on this, or I certainly hope there's some research. But what's your gut tell you? What percentage of manufacturing shutdowns are preventable versus non-preventable?
That's a really good question. I mean, I could make something up, but I don't know the answer to that. I think right now that number is certainly higher in terms of non-preventable, right? Especially with raw material and conflict in the world and things like that. But um, if you look at the chip shortage and you look at a company like Tesla, right, and they took more control over their supply chain, they, while they're certainly impacted by it, they planned, right, that this was going to happen, and they got ready for it. That's because they have visibility upstream to their supply chain down to a raw material level, and deciding, are they going to make their own batteries or even continue to work with Panasonic. So there's so much uh, that if you purely you take the name Tesla away and you say an organization that's data driven and has metrics on all parts of what they manufacture, what they build, what they sell, and what they move, you could insert any name here and just instantly go to that conclusion that, as I see things happening and as I see the world changing, and you see that there's a chip shortage beginning, could I stock up right now and take advantage of that? Similar to what was it, Southwest Airlines did a long time ago when they hedged on fuel when, what was it, 2000 and I can't remember if it was 2009 or something like that. But back in the day when they were able to have fuel at a fraction of the price of their competitors. So I just find it always to be, back to what I said earlier, right? If you're data driven or you're hippo, there's it's like that. There was a great FedEx commercial, right, where they're sitting at a boardroom table trying to figure out how to save money on reduce cost, and the guy goes, well, we could ship everything with FedEx Office, and everyone just looks at him, and it was a young guy and they said no, and then the CEO says the exact same thing, and he goes like this with his hands, and he says, well, we could save money by going with FedEx Office. And The guy goes, well, I just said it. He goes, yeah, but I use my hands, So you think about it, from that perspective, right? Like it just requires good leadership.
Well, speaking of good leadership, I've gotten to chat with you on a few different occasions, and I think you have a unique insight into what's going to be happening over the next few years. So, as a bit of a wrap up to our chat today, maybe you could tell me a bit about what you think are the biggest challenge the industry is going to face over the next 2 to 3 years, and how are you and your team and Redwood as a whole preparing for it?
Yeah, you know, I'm a tech guy through and through, as you can tell. But people are the most important part of everything, right? You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go with a team. Um, Retaining talent. I think back to the office in a reasonable way, right? Where people appreciate that camaraderie and that time together. People are missing that. We've had some events where we get a bunch of folks together and we're just hearing how great it is. And that's totally cool. Still work from home a few days, right? But let's be productive and let's sort this out so that we can, hire and retain the best people, but also deal with the new normal. And I think every company is saying that. But specifically for, logistics and supply chain, listen, the market's going to turn. But the thing is, the market cycles turn much faster now. And so what was, a 4-year, cyclical, market, volatility could now flip a few times a year. And, we're seeing that already now. Right. And so, I think just being prepared for the massive ups and downs, preparing your people for it, whether they're in the high velocity world of buying and selling freight, whether they're managing customers and trying to come up with new engineering strategies, or whether they're creating digital supply chains and trying to implement solutions. For Redwood, it's how do you retain a customer success driven relationship with, the folks whose supply chains we're implementing, and how do we constantly listen to them? And what that does is it builds purpose. And that purpose is not just to, run a great business, but that purpose is to help these organizations build amazing supply chains. And when you do that, you're doing something bigger for them, as well as building bonds between ourselves and our customers, where it's bigger than just a transactional relationship. And we've always looked at it that way, and that's always been our culture. And that's how we've dealt with 2001 and 2008 and 2014. And so, there's, and certainly the pandemic, right? So I think that the more that we are customer centric and we have this kind of open communication policy between our customers and us, and if a customer says something, right, that resonates across our enterprise, to make sure that we correct it. So that kind of purpose versus just being a cog in an organization, I think that's what people are looking for, because the challenges are not going to be predictable, right? You couldn't predict, the war in Ukraine. We couldn't predict what would happen with the, stimulus check. Who knew that when we thought it was going to be the greatest recession ever, when the world shut down, that, all of a sudden, everyone sitting at home was going to buy more than they've ever bought before. And here we are, right? So, we're not the best predicting machines when we haven't seen the inputs in the past, right? And so kind of going all the way back to your first question on machine learning and all of these great, the tech is great, but how good is a machine learning algorithm that learns from the past when the past hasn't happened yet? So it's a very roundabout answer that I'm giving you, which is because we don't know what's going to happen, we know it's going to be a people-oriented business. And if that comes first and you've got great tools behind it, you're going to be set up to win.
Well, Eric, thank you for myself. Thank you from across the entire company here at Vision. And probably most importantly, thank you on behalf of the listeners for sharing your time. And any final thoughts you'd like to share before we sign off?
No, I just want to say thank you, and I really appreciate it. I love chatting with. Well, we've chatted offline and had some great conversations, but I appreciate folks who understand how the market is changing, and look forward to chatting with you again. I just want to say thanks.
Well, again, this was Eric Rempel of Redwood Logistics, Chief Innovation Officer. This is another episode of Full of Ship. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.